Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm back once again answering Patreon supporters' questions, and in this video I'm going to answer two related questions about Old Norse manuscripts. Patreon supporter Clement Polson asks where I get my Old Norse texts. Well, when it's possible, I always like to look at the original manuscript itself. Luckily, the Árni Magnússon Institute in Iceland has made digitized scans with high resolution images of most of the significant manuscripts available online for free. I usually go to their website and try to look directly at the manuscript to make sure about what it says. Sometimes it can be very difficult to make out what it says, depends on the page. Some of these manuscripts are preserved better than others, but always whenever there's time, and especially if I'm actually publishing something or presenting something for public consumption, I want to make sure that I've got the manuscript text right. So that's what I look at. I'll post a link to where those manuscripts are available online in the video description below. You'll notice that the website is a little bit difficult to figure out at first. For one thing, it's in Icelandic. But if you click on the link that says Skoda next to a manuscript, that takes you to where the scans of it are, and then you have to go to the individual pages by clicking on, like cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3 will have 20 pages each or so, and then you've got to click page 1, 2, 3, etc., and there'll be page 1 recto and page 1 verso. That means the two different sides of the manuscript sheet. But you figure it out after a while. You can also choose to look at a lítil, that means little in Icelandic, or stór, that means big, picture of the manuscript. I usually look at the big one. If I can't figure out exactly what the text says, or if I'm not producing something for publication or for public consumption, I might look a little bit faster at one of a couple websites. Titus has the Neckel Heidelberg text of the Neckel Kuhn text of the Poetic Edda available on its website. It has each individual poem available in a different drop-down menu. I'll also post that in the links in the video description below. This follows the Neckel Kuhn text, which is the typical scholarly text of the Poetic Edda. I kind of don't like the Neckel Kuhn text because it's often at odds with exactly what you see in the manuscript in strange ways. I just feel like there's some odd editorial decisions made there, but it's often pretty close, and in a pinch it'll do. I also will go to heimskringla.no. This is a Norwegian website that publishes online versions of the texts of the Old Norse poems and sagas, both in Old Norse and in modern Scandinavian translations. In fact, my own Norwegian translations of a couple of the Eddic poems are available there. But I'll go there to get a real quick look at one of the Old Norse poems in its original form, especially if I just want to read it in Old Norse real quick and remind myself what something says. The text there is often a little bit either archaized or Icelandicized, so it often doesn't follow exactly the manuscript spellings, but either takes it back a couple hundred years or moves it forward a couple hundred years. This is not unusual in dealing with Old Norse manuscripts. Everybody has a different opinion about what the text should have originally looked like, so often, all the words are there, but the spelling that you'll find there won't be exactly what you'll find in the manuscript. Speaking of spellings and modern conventions for rendering Old Norse manuscripts, supporter James Holland asks about spellings in Old Norse manuscripts, how they're rendered on the page, how much of this is modern convention and how much of it is actually reflecting the way things are spelled on the manuscript page itself. Well, the answer is that in manuscripts, we sometimes have kind of a chaotic system, especially if you're just looking at it for the first time. Sometimes, after you've been reading a particular manuscript for a while, you kind of get a feel for this particular copier's spelling system, but there can still be a fair amount of chaos. Case in point is the vowel that we usually write in standardized Old Norse as O with a hook, O caudata, and James specifically asked about this letter. So this is how we typically write the letter in a standardized Old Norse text. But in an Old Norse manuscript, we might see any one of these spellings for it, in addition to other variants that I don't remember right this moment. So sometimes you'll see it written as an A joined together with a V or U. Sometimes as an A joined together with an O. Sometimes it's this O caudata, O with a tail. Probably where this tail comes from is actually from the bar of an A. Sometimes there's an O with a little tail above it. Sometimes there's an O with a dot above it. Sometimes there's an O with a dot below it. And sometimes just as an O. And when I say that it may be spelled in all these different ways, I don't mean just in different manuscripts. I mean, you can see all those different spellings on the same page of one manuscript. This vowel is extremely inconsistently spelled in Old Norse manuscripts. So scholars today have to kind of come up with some compromise form, something that represents what it represents the sound. Because we know this must have been one consistent sound because it is a consistent outcome in the different Scandinavian languages. It is one outcome in modern Icelandic, one outcome in Norwegian, one outcome in Swedish, etc. In modern Icelandic, this same vowel has gone forward in the mouth. So in Old Norse, this is O, and modern Icelandic is U. And it's now written in modern Icelandic as O with two dots. So some people in talking about Old Norse will write this instead of this for this vowel. But then I think that runs into some trouble because then this can be confused with yet another vowel in Old Norse, which we represent in standardized Old Norse as O with a slash. And that is the front vowel U in Old Norse. So as you can see, there's a lot of decisions that end up getting made by the editor in presenting what an Old Norse text looks like. To give you an example, I just opened up the Codex Regius scans, picked a random name that I saw, and I saw the name of the god of the sea, Njordur. The way his name was spelled on that page was like this. So we N-I-O, and this is R rotunda. This is an R that's often written as sort of a parasite on a round letter before it. Thorn, R rotunda. Now, if I were just writing this out in standardized Old Norse, I would write Njordur. I would take that I, which is acting as a consonant, and turn it into a J, the way that it's spelled in modern Scandinavian languages when it's a consonant. I would take this simple O, and since I know from the history of the word that this O is going to be this vowel, I'm going to write it as O caudata. I'm going to separate the R. I'm going to write this as an eth because it probably was pronounced voiced. But in fact, in Old Icelandic manuscripts, we don't have the same consistent distinction between thorn, the voiceless sound, and eth, the voiced sound. In some of the oldest Icelandic manuscripts, we actually see thorn for both. And then starting in the 1200s, we start to see eth creeping in when thorn is not, when it's not initial. So thorn is used at the beginning of words and eth is used elsewhere. That's also the system used in modern Icelandic. So in standardized Old Norse, we use that system too. We write eth in the middle or end of words and thorn at the beginning. And then I'm going to write the R separate too. But then what if I just want to talk about Njordur, the god of the sea, for a presentation about myth or in a book about myth or something, and I don't want to write this every time, especially because this letter is so hard to find on a keyboard. Very frequently, of course, I might resort to the modern Icelandic spell or the modern Icelandic form of that vowel with the O with two dots. If I actually spell this in modern Icelandic in the form that it has in the language spoken in Reykjavik today, I would also insert a U here and make it Njordur. But then, very frequently, we knock off the R at the end of names when we talk about Old Norse names in English. And of course, eth, since it's so often misread by people as an O, is a little bit hard to use when you're writing for an English-speaking audience. So then you have the choice of, do you write Njorth with TH or do you write Njord with a D? Do you leave some mark over this vowel to show that it's not exactly a normal O? Do you put two dots over it? You know, there's a lot of different choices you can make. The actual Old Norse manuscripts, which I encourage you to check out at the link in the video description below from the Árni Magnússon Institute, do have a wonderful variety of different ways of rendering these vowels and consonants. And like I said, you do kind of get used to it after a while, but most of the standard spelling of Old Norse is basically a modern convention that is heavily informed by modern Icelandic spellings and usages. As to another question that James asked concerning this vowel, this is related to the vowel that is spelled in modern continental Scandinavian languages, Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish, as A with a halo. So this vowel. It is the same sound, although this is long, O, and this is short, O. This comes from the long version of the same vowel, which in standard Old Norse is just written as long A. The reason why long A has that rounded sound is that this sound, this vowel letter O, is the result of a U in a following syllable rounding an ah and a preceding syllable into something rounded. So from ah to o, this rounded version of ah. But every long ah gets rounded. So all long ahs by the standard classical Old Norse period had become an o sound. And so in the modern continental Scandinavian languages, Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish, that long ah is written as a with an o above it. So it's historically an a, but pronounced as a kind of O. That's the origin, actually, why the letter's written that way. I hope that makes some kind of sense. Well, thank you again for your questions and interest, and I'll be back later with answers to more questions from Patreon supporters. For now, all the best to you.